So is a train derailment in Ohio violent or causing harm, right? No, it's not. That's not. But that guy, who robbed that other guy there, absolutely. You get locked up at a $10,000, $15,000 fine.
Welcome back to Cream City Social, my friends, and we have another illuminating conversation for you this time. We sit down with Milwaukee Freedom Fund's Nate Gilliam, and he tells us all about the two constitutional amendments that are going to be on mine and your ballots in 2 weeks on April 4th. But first, we start the conversation with the fundamentals. What is cash bail, and what situations does this cash bail put people in? We had a lot of fun talking to Nate, didn't we, Daniel?
We sure did.
What'd you take away from our conversation?
I learned a lot about the constitutional amendments here in Wisconsin, and I think that'll be very informative for people making a decision in April. But it made me think about some of the flawed ideas that drive our criminal justice system as well. A lot of people have this idea that if we put more people in jails and prisons, then it'll make us safer. And so many of the aspects of our criminal justice system are designed to keep people in the carceral system when they enter it. And cash bail is one of those things. You can't pay the fine, you have to sit in jail longer. And that is not a very efficient way of addressing crime, unfortunately. It's very expensive to house these people. It's very expensive to build new jails to accommodate them. And it just hasn't really given our communities a very good return on that investment. So regardless of your opinion on the role of police, it's just not good policy, and it's not something we should be doing.
Not going to keep us safe.
No, and it's going to cost us more.
Exactly. But before we hop into the episode, which we're about to get to, I want to try to define a word that Nate uses a lot. And that word is the state. A simple word, but maybe not a word we're all used to. I know I wasn't a couple years ago. But basically the way I think about this word is that it's calling all of the government's different agencies, different departments, different courts, the same thing. One big system that operates as one. And maybe the reason that you need the name the state is that from the perspective of the average person, all of our interactions with the police, the courts, the city, they are all essentially the same interaction, and most often negative. Each is trying to force you to do something that you don't want to do, whether it's forcing you to pay a fine for speeding, a CPS complaint and you're struggling for custody, or you're on trial. All of these interactions are experienced basically the same way. Negatively and with resistance. So it doesn't matter if the county is towing your car because you can't pay for your parking tickets, or it's the prosecutor trying your case. They are all different faces of the same machine, the same system, the same state, as one would say. And so that's kind of what I think about when I hear the word the state, different faces and interactions for the same big machine of government. Does that make any sense, Daniel?
I think so.
That's all I'm looking for. And with that little vocabulary lesson out of the way, here is a very honest conversation with someone making positive change in Milwaukee. Well, welcome. Nate, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. This was all Daniel's idea, so
Appreciate that.
thank you, Daniel. We're here today to talk about constitutional amendments, the Milwaukee Freedom Fund. But first, I think we should lay the groundwork in cash bail. What is cash bail? Can you walk us through exactly how it works and how it's related to the Milwaukee Freedom Fund?
Yeah. So cash bail, I mean, if you want to put it simple, it's a ransom from the state. What you hear from politicians and theoretically how it works is that it is the amount of money that if somebody that is incarcerated or detained, that once they're charged with an alleged crime, the amount of money that will ensure that they return back for their court cases.
So this is in between two different court cases. The initial court case where you get charged, and then you have 6 months to a year sometimes.
Yeah. Yep. So a person if they are initially supposedly within the first 72 hours, I think by law, they are supposed to be charged with a crime once they're arrested. So sometimes people get arrested and get released, for whatever reason. There's a lot of pathways that, that are in between arrest and actual imprisonment. But if someone gets detained and then charged within 72 hours, that is like, the pretrial decision. So they are held pre-trial. That's cash bail is a part of pretrial detention. So it's the amount of money that is generally set for somebody in the eyes of the state to bring them back to court.
And how much is cash bail typically? How much do people pay?
So in the state of Wisconsin, we do not have like bail bonds, and some other states do, where you pay like 10% of a bail or something like that. You have to pay the whole bail to release someone.
Oh, really?
Here in the state of Wisconsin. So bails vary. They honestly, we've been paying bail for almost 3 years now, and we look at people's charges or history and things like that. There's no rhyme or reason. So it can be as little as, we've seen as little as like $500 all the way up to, $500,000. So not to say we're paying anything like that, but that it can run the gamut. On average, at least people that reach out to us, anywhere generally from, $500 up to $50,000.
And what happens if you don't have the $500?
You will sit in jail until till your trial date, and you are either convicted or found not guilty. So that's what happens.
And even if you're found not guilty, you're still
sitting in, again, pre-trial detention. That is the key thing that I think a lot of people kind of miss, that people are held pre-trial. So they haven't been they're theoretically, technically innocent of a crime, and they're held in jail. So,
and how long is that?
Again, I think you mentioned it. It could be anywhere from a couple of weeks to honestly sometimes over years, depending on their case and depending on honestly how the state is trying to leverage over this an individual with what's going on with them in their lives in that case particularly. So. Yeah.
So when these people do reach out to you, who are they reaching out to?
We're Milwaukee Freedom Fund. I mean, we started as a protest bail fund in response to the George Floyd uprisings. We kind of, myself, my partner, and some other really awesome people, really were inspired by Minnesota. Look, in comparison to Milwaukee, looked like they had more resources, like in terms of like support for protesters on the ground and things like that. And we felt there was a gap. So we were like, okay, like let's try to, raise a few dollars here and there to try to help out and throw money at people that are going to get locked up.
Was that the intention?
Yeah.
They were going to get
Yeah, we knew
arrested?
the state's response. Yeah, because some of us, myself, some other people, we've been organizing for a long time. Some people are veterans from, different struggles locally in Milwaukee, like Derek Williams or Dr. Hamilton, Seville Smith, different things like that. And, some of us are, political in different ways and seeing, the state's kind of escalated response to protest in the way of like just generally detaining large swaths of people in protest. So like just looking at what happened in Minneapolis and the solidarity protests that started to happen around the country, we knew we had to like do something. And so we got together and started a protest bail fund. And and so that's kind of the genesis of it. In about January 2021, we shifted over to be a general bail fund. So we got in contact too with people from around the country, honestly, and around the world that have done this like a lot longer than we have, and gleaned knowledge and shared information and support in a bunch of different ways, where we knew this problem. We learned ourselves that this is not just related to protests. Like pretrial detention is incredibly harmful, and it targets Black, brown, poor people definitely in Milwaukee County, but all over the state. And so we decided, we still have some resources, even though we, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on bail, legal support, tickets, and things like that.
Is that how much it was?
Oh yeah.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. It was, and still like, there's still some cases that are still open from 2020. So really? We agreed to support, protests and some legal fees with different protesters, especially dealing with the Kenosha issue and like subsequent like Wauwatosa issues and things like that. So
Do you think that worked?
I think it did. It was an act of some harm reduction. But I will say, if we're being honest, the state we're in like backlash mode to 2020 right now, where the state is doing a lot of interesting things to really, if 2020 ever happens again, they're learning from what.
You think they're going to be prepared this time?
Well, yeah, better prepared for themselves.
Prepared.
Yeah, more prepared. So I think what we did and what we're doing is a small fraction of some harm reduction, but the state is an incredibly strong institution of harm, and so we're just a piece of an activist ecosystem that's trying to support marginalized folks. So yeah.
So let's talk about some of the harm that bail does. Could you talk about how being incarcerated pre-trial can affect somebody's life, even if it's just a few months?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies that exist out there. Like being in jail, maybe 2 or 3 days, can like upend people's lives.
Really?
They can lose housing, they can lose their jobs. Think about anybody. If you lose your housing, you lose your job. That upends your life.
How does someone lose their housing if they're incarcerated for a few days?
I mean, not being able to work or whatever, resource generation they do, that could be a part of it. Also, people are at the mercy of landlords and different things like that, and they hear about this. It might put them in precarious positions as well. So, these are part and parcel of what happens for people being locked up even just a couple of days.
And something I don't normally think about is the families that are involved in that. I mean, there's kids that their dad doesn't come home for 3 weeks, 9 months.
Yeah, absolutely. It honestly, I don't know that people really understand, like literally being locked up pre-trial can destroy families. What I will say, it's an interesting thing, like through this work, we have seen some incredible things from people's families to come out and like generate support for their person that is locked up pre-trial, or just to support them, to advocate to get them out. Like people, I think that honestly that's one of the more beautiful pieces of people accused of some kind of harm. Like their people really love them and they want them free, and they themselves, like there's bails that we can't pay, they will raise money themselves to like help pay a bail. So that and this happens, like we don't help everybody in Milwaukee County or anything like that. So even the people that don't even reach out to us, that don't even know us, like they're raising incredible amounts of money to get their person free, who might go back to prison. They might lose out on that money. So just I think people need to understand, like cash bail or even pretrial detention is an incredibly harmful practice. I know it's hard for people to understand that now, post Waukesha tragedy, or even all this the sensationalization of this part of the criminal legal system right now, and especially in local and Wisconsin media. But there's so many studies to show around the country that it's an incredibly harmful practice.
There's a study that says people who are held on bail receive longer sentences than those who can afford post bail, or those that can't afford bail.
Exactly.
After crimes.
People who get out have a better chance at defending themselves in their case, right? They can go back to resuming their lives, to whether it's supporting their family, supporting themselves. We've had instances where people accused of crimes of caretakers for the elder people in their communities, and it hurts that way too. It's not just their children; they are somebody from the community that is
other people depend on.
Yeah, other people depend on. So you take these people away, and it causes huge chasms that are harmful. Anyway.
Are you thinking of anybody in particular when you were telling those stories of beautiful moments when the families come out?
Honestly, it's unfortunate, and I think it's a part of a little bit of there's a lot of vicarious trauma in this work, and so some things run together. And so and also I just want to keep people's
for sure,
anonymity. But yeah, there's a lot of things where people really advocated hard for their people to be free or whatever. And there's some people that, yeah, like even they rallied to get their person out, and they ended up getting convicted after a trial or whatever. Um, but I don't, again, I don't think people clock that act of like, our person should be free. However long they can be free, they should be free. And I think that's an amazingly beautiful thing for people to really understand. So, yeah.
I appreciate
So,
that.
are people who are being held on bail ever pressured to take a plea deal or confess to a crime that they haven't maybe committed? And could you explain what a plea deal is?
Yeah. So most people, most people who are locked up or who actually get a chance to go to court accept plea deals. I think I'm trying to think of popular like John Oliver did a really good thing, I think, in the last 2 months or 3 months ago about bail reform that I think people should go watch. But yeah, like being incarcerated, prosecutors, police, it's an incredible amount of leverage to have on a person, your freedom, right? To say like, if you do this thing, you're going to get a shorter sentence or you'll get out or whatever like that. So yeah, that most I think most cases don't even go to trial, and people accept plea deals.
So the plea deal is essentially you confess to the crime, and in exchange you either get out pre-trial or they offer you a shorter sentence.
They can offer you a shorter sentence, or you can get charged, and because you pleaded guilty to something, you're admitting it. You get shorter time or out with conditions, so to speak, whether it be some other level of surveillance or something like that.
And do you think the people who are offered these deals have sufficient knowledge or resources to make an informed decision?
No. I think that's the point. I think none of our, we're not lawyers. We're not lawyers on staff, or we don't have lawyers on staff, but we engage with public defenders and other people who are criminal legal lawyers. Like people are just, there's not enough resources for people to truly defend themselves, and so they're at the mercy of the state, honestly, for the most part. And that's why you have such a massive incarceration rate. I think there's also studies that show, I don't know if it's the Innocence Project or people, like many people are innocent, playing down to something, thinking they're going to get out because they've been legally lied to by the state, whether it be actual police or prosecutors and different things, to plea out. So yeah.
So is cash bail an effective way to keep dangerous people out of the community, or is there any evidence that this is keeping people safer?
No. I like, if we're talking about my personal answer. Short answer, no. It's a way to it's a very classist, racist, ableist way to detain people.
How do you think it started?
Oh, cash bail?
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't know.
Just another way to make money.
Yeah. I think it's another way of the
Another
state, just how it modified to know that people couldn't jump this hoop to keep them contained. And I think it's a reform of much harsher things. I think most things are reforms of much harsher things. I think a friend, a comrade of mine said, honestly, the prison system is a reform of slavery. Like, if you think about it like that. So how these things come down. So cash bail is seeming as some kind of solution to keep people safe is an illusion, honestly.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about Darrell Brooks and the Waukesha parade. Do you think cash bail would have, or different cash bail would have prevented it from happening?
No. I mean, about his case in particular. So what I will say is that the thing that's getting kind of muted in this is that, his mother, to me, who I think is interesting, that has come out in the media and things like that and said my son needed a lot of help, right? He had severe, and I'm not excusing, I'm gonna be clear about this. I'm not excusing the harms or anything like that. But this person, his mother particularly, was exclaiming and tried to advocate and said this, my son needs help in the way that like a prison will not help. So his bail of $1,000, to me, had nothing to do with whatever preventing harms that he was capable of. I think what we're seeing right now is that we're just using this to sensationalize the issue of cash bail. But I think the harms that he or even other people, have caused many, many people, I think there's a deeper issue at play. So, the specific case, I don't know if I can look at it like that or talk about it like that. It's a wider issue. And I think the criminal legal system, whatever his bail was set at or however many times he was locked up, didn't keep him or anybody else safe. And I mean, at the end of the day, what people want is that you have this person, he'll be in jail until he dies. So you got your guy. Unfortunately, there was great harm. So yeah, there's things that I think are much deeper conversations about safety and harm related to cash bail than just, looking at $1,000 bail. No bail guarantees anybody's safety, unfortunately.
It's interesting that you mentioned that he needed certain types of help that prisons don't provide. And of course that takes resources, but cash bail also takes a lot of resources, both from the community and keeping people incarcerated. So
yeah,
it's an issue of where we invest the money.
So I'll say this too, like we have no illusions that people cause harm. We live in a violent society, and I think everybody wants to be safe and entitled to that safety, and that is correct. Like we get that. But I think many conversations that kind of focus on one thing here or one thing there don't really get at the whole picture or look at who's most vulnerable to harm, right? Or what communities are most vulnerable to harm. So I think, or even taking the state into account as a violent entity, right? Like we're not talking about the police killing people, right? Like there's no discussion of that kind of violence. So I think there needs to be a broader and wider and more holistic discussion about, harm and safety in the community, and not just, regulating it to the criminal legal system.
So what would a better system look like? How can we get rid of cash bail?
So, I mean, I don't have the answer. I think that's a lot of things are collective problem solving things that I don't think we do well in the United States. Not to say anywhere else does it well, but I think there's some hard questions and some serious good faith conversations and activities that need to happen before that solution comes to pass. But there's been some examples, like right now in Illinois, they had a suite of bills, the Pretrial Fairness Act, that's being held up in their Supreme Court because of, honestly, right-wing propaganda has held it up enough to scare people enough to balk at it. But if you look at, the some of the pretrial reforms that they've proposed are really, really good in terms of honestly working to try to keep the state honest about what it's doing, not using pretrial detention to just, lock up large swaths of honestly Black and brown people in Chicago or in Illinois in general. So there's some reforms around the country that cause less harm and eliminate the use of cash bail.
I like what you said about it being a collective problem solving activity for us. Like for these solutions to work, we all have to be on the same page. We all have to be bought in for them to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think some generative disagreement about how safety looks is going to happen. I think, I don't have the solution. I've lived in Milwaukee my whole life. I've been the victim of, violence and harm myself, just being a Black man here. I've seen gun violence, and it's touched and impacted friends and family members and different things like that. Like, so, I have no illusions about these things, but I think, the way we're doing it now, or to give the state more opportunity to leverage the power to say who's violent, who's not, who should be locked up, who's not, this amount of money, that amount of money, is beyond incomprehensible in terms of the ways to safety. It's not even a close method towards safety. So,
No.
yeah.
And in that same vein of checking the state or even Republican roadblocks, you could call them, two constitutional amendments that are up in Wisconsin. They, on face value, almost sound reasonable. Is that a fair thing to say? I'll read them out here for us because they just sound, I don't know, if you don't know more information about it, you could come away thinking a very different thing. Anyway, the first one is authorizes, these two amendments authorizes judges to impose cash bail on an accused person of violent crime based on the circumstances, like the need to protect the community from serious harm and the probability the accused will not appear in court. On face value, that doesn't sound terrible.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, it's also
What's
like
between the lines here? Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of context here. I mean, we're all there's no human being. I am like, I think I'm smart. I think I have critical lens and critical
Everybody does,
analysis.
yeah.
But like we've been inundated over the last, honestly, even before Darrell Brooks, with kind of a sensationalization of harm and violence. Like every single day, even if you scroll to social media about, like who reports on like shootings and things, you just think you walk outside, it's a Wild West in Milwaukee, right? And that and there's a special attention about lifting up stories of people who may be out pretrial and may cause harm. But the thing about that is that like there's so many studies that show that it's a very minuscule amount of people who are out pretrial that actually cause harm. Violent crime generally has actually gone down, like honestly, over the last 30 years. We've had this spike during the pandemic, and even the CDC says it has something to do with like isolation.
What a
loss
crazy
of
concept. We're all locked in our houses.
Yeah.
Can you imagine we go a little crazy?
with isolation, loss of income, access, and different things related to people's material conditions. So that causes, even the CDC is saying like, oh, these things are factors to a spike in murder rates in different places around the country, and especially in Milwaukee. But the narrative, and so we're inundated with all this, whether it's media from our favorite politicians, even the ones that some of us like, say these things. And so, yeah, you see that, you read that question, it's like, oh my goodness, yes, I want the judges to have that opportunity to do this thing, to keep our community safe, but not really reflecting on real safety. So the issue is that judges already have that power to, issue, if they think somebody is harmful or that is a threat to public safety, they can actually even detain them without cash bail. Like, this person's such a threat to society, we need to guarantee that they're locked up until trial. So the judges already have that power. What this does is like honestly codify creep, I think, creep of the legislature over the judiciary to kind of force judges to do that, and probably a little bit more punitively at this point in time.
And so when you say creep, you mean codifying in law practices that already happen, like judges are already kind of making sure that very violent criminals don't get out or have large bails?
I think it's the Republican legislature essentially telling the judiciary, I mean, because that's part of the narrative too. So what happened after Darrell Brooks was like, besides cash bail was the biggest lightning rod, but it was also like, who are these judges that are letting violent people go? So it's also like very much like, oh, we'll hold you accountable, whatever.
Let's get you at the source.
Yeah, whatever that means for Republican legislature. So these are things that so the creep is we don't have checks and balances of whatever the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. So they are like forcing their hand over the judiciary, saying we have control over how you decide these things.
This is how you have to decide.
This is how you have to decide these things. Yes.
And it would be much more difficult to eliminate cash bail in the future if this passes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just going to make judges put people behind bars with exorbitant bails, and not even Milwaukee Freedom Fund or any other bail fund in the state would be able to support and help them. So it's incredibly unfortunate that this is where we are after a lot of things, but yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah. So I'll read off the Second Amendment just so everyone has a heads up for what's going to be on their April 4th ballot. They want to authorize the state legislature to define serious harm in relation to conditions a judge imposes on an accused person released before conviction. Not sure I totally understood that sentence, but this also seems pretty positive, and I'm guessing it's the same lack of context.
Well, I think I'm not gonna say which is scarier, but so the thing about that, it's incredibly scary, and I don't think people are clocking that. So it's allowing the legislature to define violence or harm.
Define serious harm.
Yeah, serious harm or violence. And so, whatever your tools of critical analysis are in the world, whatever, you can be anywhere on any kind of political spectrum. But if we're being honest, like the state has, leftist jargon here, it has a monopoly on violence, right? Like materially has a monopoly on
The
violence.
police are the only ones that are allowed to.
Police, the military, federal, whatever, they can harm people with almost no repercussions, right? So what this does, though, is give also the ideological monopoly on violence of saying this is what we're defining as violence. So I think that's incredibly scary.
Allow the state legislature to authorize what that
So
is.
yeah, so is a train derailment in Ohio violent or causing harm, right? No, it's not. That's not. But that guy, who robbed that other guy there, absolutely. You get locked up at a $10,000, $15,000 bond. Or the, Northern, whatever railway.
Norfolk's out there, whatever
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about all those
Don't
dead
worry,
deer or
you're
anything.
good.
Mm-mm.
You're good, So yeah, corporate violence, no, it's not violence. The state, killing people at 100 people a month. No, it's, we're good, So I think that's how I read that. That's how I take it. It's the material monopoly on violence and now the ideological monopoly on violence. And I'm still wondering if that's like unprecedented around the country. I mean, in practice, it kind of exists already, right? Like,
I was gonna say, who else decides?
Yeah, I don't know. It's I haven't done that research yet. Honestly, I just became aware of some of this relatively recently. So, yeah. I think that should scare anybody. I don't care who you are.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Downvote it on April 4th, or do whatever you want to do with that information, but know that it may not be as it appears.
What else can we do to support Milwaukee Freedom Fund and the work that you do?
I think you don't have to, you don't have to call yourself anything. You don't have to be an abolitionist. You don't have to call yourself a radical. You don't have to do any of that. But I wish people would take the time to genuinely try to look at how the criminal legal system or the carceral state or whatever you want to call it impacts the most marginalized people in Milwaukee, but across the country, and really wrestle with those things and really get on board at how to try to honestly, I would say abolish it, but like,
change it, make it better.
Yeah,
make
transform the conditions where we don't need this state like that, because we're already dealing with so much. Like everybody, it's going to impact everybody. We're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with pandemic, with maybe future pandemic. We don't know, right? There's so many things. There's
supply chain shortages.
Right,
whatever.
exactly. So there's so much that people are dealing with, that this kind of power and resources that the carceral state has, I just really wish people would really unpack that and get involved with other orgs and things like that to transform our our collective existence. And supporting Milwaukee Freedom Fund. Yeah, I mean, I guess follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook. You look at our website. You could donate if you want. We appreciate that. But yeah, I think that's, to me, one of the biggest things is that beyond just the material support and understanding that this legal system is skewed in structural and violence itself, like to really try to understand that, because it impacts everybody. Like people think it doesn't impact them, it does. It absolutely does. So
Do you have maybe any resources you could recommend for people to learn more about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great writers and books, and so I mean, there's give you so many books, but there's
Easy watching, maybe that John Oliver cash
yeah.
bail
I mean,
segment.
honestly, John Oliver, and then even within his stuff, he has some notes. Has the bail reform episode, which I think came out, I can't remember, 2 or 3 months ago, was really good. There's if I put together a beginner's level list, like Derica Purnell has done some good interviews, I think, with Trevor Noah and Daily Show and stuff like that. There's, of course, the greats of, or the current greats, a little bit more dense, but like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, James Kilgore. I got a book right here that's one of my favorite kind of overarching books, Carceral Con by Kay Whitlock and Nancy Heitzig, which is really, really good to give a good primer to understanding. There's Prison Policy Institute. That's a good website.
On social media too.
Yeah,
Follow them.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of just brilliant abolitionists that do practical work, but also talk about these ideas and how to transform our world. Yeah. So I think particularly there's a website that I would like people to look at, especially related to here.
You're smiling right now.
I know. I gotta. God, now it's called Defund Courts, or Beyond Courts. I'm sorry. And it was put together, I think, part by Interrupting Criminalization, another good organization people should follow on social media. But they're really working to unpack like courts. So I think in this era, people generally understand how bad the police are, right? Mm-hmm. They generally kind of understand how bad some politicians are, but people don't really understand the whole process unless you yourself or like a family member or somebody else is really, and you were heavily involved in that, have gone through the court systems to unpack like how harmful like each step of the courts are related to the prison industrial complex. So
I personally really like The New Jim Crow as well.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent book. It's not too long and it's pretty straightforward, so I think that's also a good starting point.
Yeah, that's a good entry point. But I definitely would suggest there's some other Victoria Law. Now you got me thinking about like authors and different people. I think I mentioned Derica Purnell, Victoria Law. God, of course, Angela Davis, and God, why am I blanking right now? I'm sorry. But yeah, there's just so many brilliant writers and thinkers that exist and that have done great practical work to do some great harm reduction and talk towards abolition. So, yeah.
We'll put some of those in the show notes, I think. And stay tuned for Daniel's book club on The New Jim Crow.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to share before we sign off here, Nate? I'll let you go.
Yeah, again, I hope people, even if these amendments pass, it's not a done deal in terms of how people resist. The state, why the state is doing this, because it's so scared of, people resisting. It's so scared of things like 2020 or, 2014 or 2009 with Oscar Grant. You can keep going back to people's led resistance to state violence or just conditions. I just want people to remain as I talked about a lot of sad things, optimistic and hopeful for a better future, and really,
yes,
but not like in an idealistic way, being like grounded and understanding what we're up against. And I think just being consistent, like, everybody doesn't have to be Eugene Debs or Assata Shakur or anything like that. It's just like, just really, understanding the conditions and pushing towards better. So
I like it. Consistent, grow your own garden. Things will bloom around you. Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in, Nate.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. Yeah.